I'm joined today by congressional candidate for California's 12th district and challenger to Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, Shahid Buttar. Shahid, thank you so much for joining me today.
Glad to be here, Nathaniel. Thanks for having me.
So I first wanted to get your reaction to some of the events happening in the world today. The death of George Floyd at the hands of the Minneapolis Police Department has spurred protests nationwide and even internationally. And in response to these protests against excessive force, the police have been using excessive force. Now, I know you're a constitutional lawyer, which I am not, but it seems to be the case that using excessive force and cracking down on these peaceful protests and cracking down on the First Amendment is not the proper response. So I kind of wanted to get your reaction to some of these events going on in the world.
Yeah, to say the least, it's not a proper response. I would describe what we're living through as an authoritarian coup, compounding centuries of racial injustice. It's one thing for Black people to have been mercilessly preyed upon, relentlessly, for hundreds of years, even preceding the creation of our republic. And Black Lives Matter, and I'm here for it, and that's why we're in the streets. The government response to the mobilizations aiming to vindicate Black lives and aiming to ensure that Black Lives Matter implicate not just Black lives and not just civil rights and not just police accountability, but our democracy. And your right to seize on the First Amendment harm of militarized suppression of dissent. But I just want us to, pin the tail on the donkey, so to speak. We are living through authoritarianism. We have an unapologetically criminal president who is welcoming violence by paid agents of the state, who we employ to keep us safe, to suppress our rights. That is a defining cornerstone of authoritarianism, and a great deal is at risk at the moment. I fear that we are living through an inflection point, and I hope in retrospect that we can look back on it as a liberatory one and not one at which we will be regretting a hammer falling.
Yeah, there's definitely systemic inequalities present in our country. One thing that was heartening to me to see is just the solidarity across class lines, across race lines, and people just generally coming together to support this one issue and speak their minds that Black Lives Matter. Another area that I think there's systemic inequality is in regard to climate change. I think there are areas in our nation that are disproportionately impacted by the climate problem. And this is going to be an issue that our children and our children's children are going to be experiencing. And one progressive policy that progressives feel like might mitigate some of the damages of climate change is the Green New Deal, which I believe Nancy Pelosi referred to as the Green Dream or whatever.
Right.
So I wanted to get, or whatever, nothing, no big deal.
Yeah.
So I was hoping to get your reaction to Nancy Pelosi's dismissiveness, and generally, what do you think that we need to do as a nation and really the world to make sure that this is a problem that our children are not dealing with?
Well, our children are going to deal with it because we've already forced them to deal with it. At this point, the question is, will they have a chance to deal with it, or are we going to kick them off a cliff? And Pelosi is committed to kicking them off a cliff. The entire generation of policymakers in Congress at the moment, with a handful of exceptions, has been committed to kicking all of your children off a cliff. That's what they've been doing for 30 years, or at least her in office for 30 years. That's what the rest of them have been doing, frankly, as a body for longer than that. But the Green New Deal is an absolute imperative. And I would peel apart a few different parts of it. One part of it is the commitment to 100% renewable energy, and that's critically important. Politically, in order to make that policy feasible, we need to ensure a just transition, and that's why the federal jobs guarantee that is included within the vision of the Green New Deal is so profound. A lot of people don't necessarily understand how the economics connects to the environmentalism, but the point is, without the economics, we can't get the environmentalism. So connecting those two issues is of integral importance. A further piece here, you mentioned before, you described climate catastrophe as a racial justice issue, and it absolutely is. And I want to put wheels on this car. Around the world, communities have long suffered abuse at the hands of a resource industrial extraction complex that we sometimes describe as a military industrial complex. It's more than that. It is an extraction complex. It is a climate chaos generating complex, both because the Pentagon is the world's largest institutional source of carbon pollution, and because what we use it for, and what we use the CIA for, what we use our defense apparatus for, is to plunder resources from other countries, particularly oil and gas. And that has, over the last 70 years, been a crucial part of the climate crisis. And the climate justice movement often thinks about our aims as rooted solely in energy policy. But the fact of the matter is that to get climate justice, we have to defund the Pentagon. We have to close the CIA. We need to impose accountability on our rogue national security agencies. And this is another area separate from her derision of the Green New Deal, where Speaker Nancy Pelosi has been actively unhelpful. She's an architect of mass surveillance. She's a cheerleader for wars for profit. She is a key bulwark of the executive secrecy that enables the international human rights abuses, fueling the ecocide, for instance, in Brazil at the moment, or Bolivia. These are areas, right-wing coups in the last 2 years. The U.S. likely had a role. We don't know. A large part of the reason why is because Speaker Pelosi is the figure who denies members of Congress access to staff with security clearance. And it's not just Trump. She plays a critical role in enabling the various abuses of our criminal president. And, inhibiting climate justice and standing in the way of that is just one of many ways in which she unfortunately stands against everyone's children at the moment.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I like how you recognize that all of the issues are kind of connected together, and these aren't new issues. It seems like the military industrial complex is something that's been growing for decades and decades. And, some Democrats, Speaker Pelosi in particular, talk about Donald Trump being an existential crisis, yet they vote to give him a bigger defense budget. They vote to give him increased spying powers. And you get issues like the mass protests going on across the United States and police that have now been militarized, cracking down on these protests. And Congress themselves are on recess. I haven't heard anyone make any sort of strong statement to what's going on in the world.
Well, and strong statements aren't enough. I mean, Nancy Pelosi showed up with her hand on a Bible talking about the need for a strong statement, but she's been in office for 30 years. She's had plenty of chances. And frankly, I'm over it. I'm not waiting for strong statements. I want policies. And I'm done waiting. I'm a constituent who's had to be in the streets because she's refused to do her job for 30 years. And, the End Racial Profiling Act has been proposed in Congress for 20 years. Mm-hmm. It's never been enacted. She's a large part of the reason why. There are other measures. Just this week, Ilhan Omar and Justin Amash, a Republican member of Congress from Michigan, teamed up to introduce a bill to end qualified immunity. I proposed that 2 years ago, and this would be a critical reform to enable the effective prosecution of cops who kill. And it's striking to me that it wasn't until the year 2020 that bill even gets introduced in Congress. And obviously it's not law yet. And it frankly needed to be law 100 years ago. And these, well, frankly, it didn't, because the judges only created the doctrine in the 1960s. So maybe I'm overstating the case, but the point remains, we have measures that we could be pushing into policy. And a big part of the reason why those proposals haven't become policy yet is because the Democratic Party and the House are led by a wealthy landlord who privileges her class interests over the interests and needs of her constituents. And that's why we have an affordable housing crisis in the country. It's why we don't have universal health care. It's why we're dealing with the climate catastrophe. It's why we're witnessing an authoritarian crackdown, because across each of these instances, Nancy Pelosi in particular, as the leader of the Democratic Party, has proven more willing to prioritize taxpayer-funded bailouts for corporate lobbyists than vital needs of the American people.
Yeah, and it seems like these corporate lobbyists and big corporations were the first people that were saved with these COVID bills. And here people are, some people didn't even receive a $1,200 check, but the people that received the $1,200 check, that was probably spent within the first month, maybe the first few weeks, and they're gone. They're not helping us out. And in regard to what you're saying about Speaker Pelosi refusing to address these problems, it seems like Speaker Pelosi, in my opinion, is more about style and less about substance. You mentioned her coming out with the Bible, read a few lines from the Bible in response to Donald Trump cracking down on the First Amendment for a photo op. Yeah. And Nancy Pelosi also did that performative act of tearing up Donald Trump's speech when his speech was over. So why do you think it is that it's so important that we replace Nancy Pelosi, and how would that help progressive goals?
Yeah, I would say that to say that she is style over substance is frankly too charitable, because, and here's why, because to suggest that suggests that at least the style has good flair. But when you show up with your hand on a Bible, what you're doing then is not only pandering and not only ducking to the president's uh, style, but I mean, it's collapsing it's eroding the church-state separation barrier. I mean, she's actually
Right.
proving actively unhelpful in the act of her theatrical resistance. Impeachment is the same thing. You know, when she showed up a year late for impeachment and then limited the process in a way that I warned at the time, and I hate being proven right about these things, left the president in office. In other words, if anybody else held the gavel, Donald Trump would not be the president today. The only reason he's still in office is because Nancy Pelosi showed up for impeachment like a boxer throwing a fight. And I could make that same case 10 different ways, right? It wasn't Trump who wrote the check to fund his concentration camps. That took Nancy Pelosi. It wasn't Trump who passed the bill for his corporate trade policy or the military budget through Congress. That was Nancy Pelosi. There's a whole range of ways in which Pelosi actively supports Trump while demonstrating this theatrical resistance. And theatrical resistance is worse than none at all, both because it fools some people into thinking she's showing up for work, and because it frankly contrives a debate when the real debate is not between Democrats and Republicans, because they march in lockstep on too many issues. The real debate is between the American people and our corporate political parties. And that's why I'm here, to represent we the people of the United States and we the people of San Francisco, who have long been denied a voice in Congress. And I dare say not only does San Francisco deserve a voice in Congress that's aligned with our city's proud principles, but I think Congress needs San Francisco's voice. San Francisco is a particularly prescient city. We're the countercultural capital of the country. And this is an epicenter of the movements for free speech, regenerative agriculture, human rights, LGBT inclusion, immigrant rights, peace and justice. There's so many issues where social movements have found a genesis and a crucible here. We need the voice representing those movements in Congress, not just for the sake of San Francisco, but for the sake of our national body politic.
Right. Yeah, I think the United States as a whole recognizes that California, and specifically San Francisco, are a leader of these many issues that later become adopted when there's enough pushback from the country saying that we need to enact some of these policy goals. And I think you raise a good point about the fact that Congress doesn't represent the people. Usually when Congress says that they have some sort of bipartisan bill, I get worried, because that's Democrats and Republicans coming together to screw the American people. They don't represent us. And so my last question to you, this might be the most difficult question of them all. A few weeks ago, Nancy Pelosi gave an interview on the Late Late Show with James Corden, where she showed off her designer ice cream. It was about a few $100s worth of ice cream. And
tweezers worth $20,000 each. Yeah,
exactly. And I saw that and I was astounded. Why is this something that you would show off, especially during a crisis when we're at one of the all-time highs with unemployment? So my question to you is, do you own $20,000 refrigerators? And do you think that someone that has those expensive refrigerators is representative of the United States as a whole?
Yeah, I do not own a fancy refrigerator. In fact, I frankly don't own anything. I'm an immigrant with no property. I mean, seriously, I'm still paying back my student loans. You know, I don't have a family legacy like she did. She was born with a silver spoon in her mouth to a powerful East Coast family. She's the matriarch of a political dynasty, and she's worth over $100 million. That's a ton of money, which is just to say she doesn't face the pressures that the rest of us do. And I do. I am a renter in San Francisco. I understand the affordable housing crisis. She makes $1 million a year off rent as a landlord. Wow. So of course she's not going to show up for affordable housing. Why would she? And you know, I would just describe it as the difference between politics by inertia and theater and institutional interest, that's Pelosi, versus a politics that's grounded in our nation-stated commitments to our rights, to our fundamental principles. You know, when we look to this moment in time in our nation's history and the crisis of inclusion, and, you know, as an immigrant, I'm very proud to be an immigrant. I'm very proud to be a brown person in the United States. And I think about often the inscription on the base of the Statue of Liberty, the poem talking about bringing me your tired, poor, hungry masses yearning to breathe free. I understand that. That is my family. That's why I'm here. And that's why I'm running for Congress, to make those promises that we have written in our Constitution, our Declaration of Independence, our national documents of which we're so proud, justifiably, to make those promises real, because we've been waiting too long. And it is the failure to realize those promises that have delivered us to the crises that we're confronting today. And I will not let authoritarianism take root on this shore.
100% agreed. I definitely think that we need more people like you in Congress and less Nancy Pelosi's. He's running for Congress in California's 12th district against Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. Shahid, I'm humbled that you joined me today. Please do come back and give us an update on the race.
You're really kind. I'd be happy to do it. And people can learn more or sign up to volunteer with us or contribute online at www.shahidforchange.us. We're also on all of the major social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitch, at Shahid for Change.
Thank you so much, Shahid.
Thank you, brother. Have a good weekend.
Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Agree or disagree, let's have a conversation. And subscribe to join the political revolution against mainstream media. CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, they're bought and paid for. Independent progressive media is the path forward. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.